Welcome to the Get Unhooked podcast with Jason Coombs, where experience meets insight. Jason Coombs, nationally recognized speaker, best-selling author, and founder of Brickhouse Recovery, shares hard-earned lessons on resilience, leadership, addiction, and mental health. No filters, no fluff, just real stories, practical wisdom, and a deeper look at what it takes to grow, lead, and keep moving forward. Now here's your host, Jason Coombs.
So this chapter 10 is about the moment that finally began to shift for me, but only after I almost walked away from it all. And so I'm going to set the scene. If you think of me in my young 30s, I'm in my fifth attempt at treatment. This is at a place called The Ranch, and there was a horse and a couple alpacas and a big, beautiful home and a lot of space. And it was a treatment center for men. And it was the one that my best friend, Dave Pinniger, had went through 3 years prior. And so it worked for him. And so I was like, okay, this is my last chance. I think I need to go where he went. And I was outside, and it's a couple weeks in to being sober. And it was a chilly, brisk spring morning. You know, the snow in Utah flies, and then in the afternoon you start to see the sun come up, and then the flowers start to bloom, and then the next day it snows. It's a very temperamental, similar to where we live in Idaho, or where my family lives in Idaho in the springtime. I was out there. Well, so actually, let me back up. This is the morning I'm in detox. So I'm leaving detox, and on the outside, this was, like a hardened version of myself, but on the inside, I was like dying. I didn't know where my next turn was, and I was so scared of dying, but I was also not really sure how I was going to be able to do treatment again. So I was already starting to scheme. The addict voice was working inside my mind, telling me that I can manipulate this next program and do what I've always done in treatment. So I'm sitting outside of detox, waiting for my ride. This white van pulls up, and the gentleman gets out, and he introduces himself as Shakes. His name is Dave, but he was nicknamed Shakes for when he was detoxing, and he just couldn't stop shaking. I was pretty resistant and dismissive of him. I didn't really care to make any friends at the time, but I was desperate for connection inside. And this is that juxtaposition of like, how do you understand someone that has this spiritual anorexia deep within, but on the outside has a strong, ripped ego that it's been at the gym every single day working out because it's been an addiction, and the selfishness is just at its height. And, I think it's important to note that addicted people often stop developing emotionally at the age that they start using. So even though I was 31, I acted like a defiant teenager because I started to use here and there when I was a teenager. So introducing this idea that I learned in this treatment program is called terminal uniqueness, where, I thought I was different from everybody. And I remember looking back through the history of my life, and no matter where I was, whether it was in my family setting at the dinner table or whether it was around my extended family with my cousins, and then, continue throughout my life when I'm in the workplace or I'm in class, in school, whatever that looks like, I'm always feeling like I'm alone and I'm different. And that terminal uniqueness can get to the point where you feel like rules don't apply to you. You're entitled to do what you want when you want. Your money's my money if it's in front of me. Your car is my car. My parents' home was my home. I've alluded to this before, where I just would walk in and do whatever I wanted. I would take heirlooms, go and pawn them until they got off the beach and began to set up some of those physical boundaries, like put an alarm on their home. That was my mindset going into this final treatment program. I was terminally unique, and I was entitled, that the rules didn't apply to me. So one of the highlights of this particular chapter is the setting when I was in group. And so I'm in a circle with with these men. And in my first group session, I decided to not get up in the morning on time. And I slept through breakfast. I slept through the chores, and I showed up late for group. Decided to grab some things out of the cupboards on my way to group and eat it in the hallway on the way, which both were the rules that I was not supposed to break. And I sat down in group, but just kind of give this air that, like, don't talk to me, don't confront me, but I'm here, like, leave me alone. That's not how it went, because this goes to show how not every therapeutic group is therapeutic. And I think it's important to consider, like, when you are selecting a treatment program or finding a support group for yourselves, it's asking yourself, are these individuals that I'm surrounding myself with going to let me hide and kind of run my own show? Or would they be willing to confront me with love? Would they co-sign on my BS, or would they confront me with love? And of course, I wasn't thinking about these things, but these particular men did not let me sit there and let that go unnoticed. My brother Russ, he is now a therapist at that treatment center, which is a really cool full circle moment for him. But he was another resident, 23 years old, and he brought up that he had a resentment toward me. And I'm not even sure if he knew my name at the time, because it was so early on in my stay. But he essentially called me out for not following the rules, and he expressed that they were serious about their recovery. And if I wasn't going to follow the rules, essentially this wasn't the place that was going to fly. So it was cool, because as the confrontation went on throughout that day and throughout the following days and weeks, they weren't fighting me, and they weren't being mean, although I felt like they were picking on me. They were actually fighting for my life, and they were fighting for theirs in a way that I didn't yet know how to do myself. So I want to highlight that peer confrontation plus unconditional love plus compassion plus collaboration is what cracked my armor. If it was just straight confrontation without a follow-up of love and compassion and signs of love and compassion, there's just no way I would have cracked. I would have stayed hard. But when I was in this space, if you recall in the chapter where I am actually in my step one group, and they were helping me see all of my defense mechanisms that I use to shuck and jive and to manipulate and to gaslight. And I used tears, I used anger, I used hostility, I used spiritualizing, I used minimizing, I used justifying, I used denial. There were a lot of deflecting and blaming. I went through the whole list as they were asking me about my disease and about my powerlessness. And essentially this process was designed to, number one, help me come to awareness of my powerlessness over drugs and alcohol, and that my life had become unmanageable. That was essentially the goal. But how they did that was, to me, fascinating from a psychological standpoint, because in the process of holding up mirrors to me, they were able to bring up additional defense mechanisms that flared up uncontrollably. Like I wasn't manipulative from the standpoint of like, okay, now I'm going to shed some tears, or now I'm going to show some hostility and intimidate, or now I'm going to start blaming my family, and now it was automatic. And that is why the disease is so gripping on someone, is, if they hadn't challenged those things. Like when I would say something that was true, they would question it, they would doubt it, and I would then react. And so it was like they were bringing up all my reactions. And it wasn't until later, like weeks later, I started to see the whole purpose of this process, because really I just felt like I was in a corner. It was fight or flight. And so I was trying to fight as as not physically, but I was trying to defend myself as long as I could until I was told that if you don't want to follow the rules and you don't want to change, if you don't want to do recovery the way we're showing you, then you can go pack your bags and leave. This was the residents that said that. And so I got up and I left and went up to my room and I started packing my bags. And this was a point in time where I was done. I was furious. My ego was just challenged over and over and over. I thought I was going to be able to like slide my way through it. I had been slick in the past and been able to work my way through a lot of different pinches that I was in. But this one, no matter what I tried, it went to a dead end. And it just got me more furious, more confused. And so as I was packing my bags, well, one bag, because I didn't really have anything, I was ready to leave. And that would have been it. Another failure, most likely death. But if you think back to where I was at 2 years prior, when I received the gift of volition, once Nathan was born and I walked through the adoption process, I had that still deep down in. And so part of me did want to change, but the addict voice was so much louder, so much louder. And so I needed people around me to help me reconcile this. But what ultimately happened was I laid down on my bed, just frustrated in the middle of packing, thinking about where am I going to go? Like, it had snowed again that day. So where am I going to go? I'm going to go back out to the streets in the snow. I don't have a ride. I'm going to have to go to the train or catch a bus. I have no money. And what am I going to do when I get down there? Like, how am I going to get drugs? How am I going to, I was just like trying to go through all of, and if there would have been an easy path, like, oh, I'll just call my mom and she'll come pick me up and she'll give me some money and I can go get loaded. Like, if there would have been an easy path, I go, it would have been easy to make that call. But because they had cut all of those paths off, there was no one that I could go to that was like, yeah, I'll come get you. Sure. Yeah, here's $20. So I just sat there. I was thinking and thinking. And I had a divine intervention. And that divine intervention was that I fell asleep. I was so exhausted. And I felt like almost like this spell came over me, or a warm blanket that just like put me right to sleep. And I woke up a little while later and I wasn't as mad. I was more like scared and broken. And that's when I went down to talk to my counselor, and Chris processed this with me. And she was like, what are you willing to do for your sobriety? And that was the question that changed everything at that time. She's like, what are you willing to do to be sober and to change? And at the moment I was like, anything, but I can't stay here with these men, but I have nowhere to go. And she said, well, it sounds like you got a choice to make. And she gave me 2 conditions. She said, if you're going to stay here, you have to follow the rules, even the little petty ones, the small ones, like you can't open the cupboards whenever you want and get food. Like, there are times for that. There's there's structure for a reason. And then you're going to need to make amends to the men and ask them how you can make it right with them by the way you've been acting and how you've treated them and the things you've said to them. And ask them if they're willing to help you. And I was like, no way will I do that. Not a chance. I can't stand these men. But what was cool about this experience, like, she just set 2 boundaries, said, these are the conditions. If you're to stay here, here's the agreement. You follow every rule and you make amends to the group. And so there I was left with my choice and my agency. So it wasn't on Chris what I decided to do. She just laid out 2 paths and then allowed me to make that choice. And that is, in motivational interviewing, that's what we call really like honoring their identity instead of authority. It's individuality. It's supporting individuality. That's a better term. And recognizing that I had the answer within me if I would just sit with it and make that choice. And so boundaries and rules and accountability, those are the things that saved my life, even though I'd fought them every step of the way. That's why it's so important to begin, embracing that within the home and within the relationship, because the idea of just getting them to treatment and hoping that it works, well, just know, like, that's what treatment is full of, is boundaries, rules, and accountability. And so you can model that prior to them going to treatment, or even without them going to treatment, and save the money. And, but for those that have to go through treatment, it's like cancer. You sometimes need a higher level of care than just doing it on your own, like I did. So there was another like spiritual barrier that I was up against, and faith in the 12 steps. That was a huge barrier for me. This spiritual barrier. Explain like what that was like for me is to explain that is difficult, but it was a roadblock because I mentioned like I was pretty cynical and I had some little t traumas around religion, nothing major like I've seen some individuals have, but I had a real misunderstanding of who my higher power was. This concept was shaped by my own ego and my own brain, and of course the influence from the dark side, for sure, the destroyer, as I call him, and the disease combined. And so I did not feel like there was unconditional love and trust between me and my maker. But as Chris worked with me on that, she gave me the solution to build my own concept of a higher power, and talk about writing my ideal God list of relatable, personal, non-threatening characteristics and hobbies and personality traits. And I had never really done that. I kind of just assumed he was a distant power that was really angry at me and disappointed in me. So I say this as a jumping off point because number one, I almost left treatment when I wouldn't have had this experience had I left. Number two is once I decided to stay, now I'm at this fork in the road of like, I have a big roadblock. If you're telling me that a higher power needs to be found and a relationship needs to be built in order for me to recover, we've got a problem. And so I had a lot of stuff inside that she helped me to kind of sort through, and she had me write him a letter. I thought it was the dumbest idea. I was just dismissive and discredited her and disregarded this suggestion. But as I sat with it, I was like, I have to follow every rule. I'm going to be streeted. I got to follow the rule. So I began. And as I started this letter, I let him have it. I'm not going to lie. Like, it was full of expletives and swear words. It was full of blaming. I yelled at him in this letter. A big part of that was because I felt like at the time, I remember like, why did you give me this disease? I know so many people that had a drink or used drugs recreationally, but they were still living happy lives, it seemed. They didn't go homeless. They didn't have this disease. So why did God give me this? And I was so mad when I started to feel all the pain and the loss that I experienced. And I didn't know who to turn that blame on other than myself and God. But it was a lot easier at this time to blame him. But it's a really cool experience. And I know I've shared this in a lot of other places and venues, but what happened, it altered my relationship with my maker forever. And this is the point in time where I feel like my mother's prayers for all those years were being answered. My father's prayers, there's just no other explanation, but I had this outpouring of venom that I was expressing in this letter that I ended up reading out loud. By the way, that was the second suggestion. It's like, once you read this, or once you write this, then I want you to go and read this out loud to him and express it to him, like, openly. And as I was doing that, and the venom was coming out and I was feeling it all, then when those feelings come out, it's not just going to be an empty hole, a vacuum. Like, it's got to be filled with something. And this love poured in as I could see through my spiritual eyes. I could see my birth son's face. And it was like it all made sense at the same time. I don't even remember going through this thought process, but the understanding that I came to know all at once was that, Jason, I love you unconditionally. There is nothing you could do that would stop me from loving you just like you love Nathan. And I know there's nothing that Nathan could do that would stop me from loving him. Nothing. And if he was mad at me for placing him for adoption, and if he felt abandoned by me, if he felt unloved and he was angry, all I would ever want is for him to come tell me. And then I would follow that up with a huge hug, and I would just validate him and tell him that I love him. And it was this understanding that came all at once. And I knew now at that point, and ever since then, that I had misunderstood who God is and how much love he has for us, and how much love he is willing to show even the most wretched and destructive kids of his. And he showed me that he's there for me. And so I look at that as a huge fork in the road for me. Had I not taken that suggestion, would I have had that experience at some other point? I mean, I got to believe that he would have figured out another way to get to me for sure. And he had been with me all along. It was just me getting through those stages of change, really. But he was the reason I walked through those stages of change, through the help and the roles of family members and influencers. So that moment did change everything for me. Not because someone forced it, but because someone made a space for me and held that space for me to find it myself and gave me some guidance. And so how does this connect to you as a family member, your role as an influencer? Well, I wouldn't have had this moment without my family stepping back and doing their own recovery work. There's so many things I can think of that had they not been in recovery, I could have easily gotten my dad to come scoop me up and drive me to where, maybe put me up in a hotel and leave me with, a couple of 20s saying that I was going to go get a bus to an AA meeting or, there were ways, but they were in recovery. They were doing their work. They had put up strong fences. They let go. They stopped rescuing me. And that's what made this space possible. That's what helped me move from one stage of change to the next. And so there's a quote in the chapter that says, this gift, this desperation, combined with my family's healthy contributions beforehand, was the elixir that finally set me free. So it's this combination between my heavenly parents and my earthly parents coming together, and that elixir with the right timing finally set me free. So there's hope as you're watching your loved one who is fighting recovery. Don't underestimate the role that you play. It's important to know what's yours and what's theirs. Staying in your lane and working your own recovery and holding healthy boundaries by staying off the beach and wearing your emotional raincoat. Do the dance, don't do the wrestle. Learn those steps to surrender and apply them on a daily basis. You're doing more good than you know. And maybe the biggest work that you need is to look at yourself and forgive yourself from all of the self-condemnation and the negative self-talk of all the things that you wish you would have done or should have done or shouldn't have done or shouldn't have said. But just go with I forget who said this. I think anyway, she's famous, but she said, when we know better, we do better. When I knew better, I did better. And so what you can do now is you can support them and let them get to their jumping off point by allowing those natural consequences and continue to work on securing and guarding your peace, your serenity, and your ability to serve and lift others. Because as you lift others, I promise you that this triangle effect is happening. While you're serving God's kids, somebody is serving your kid or your addicted loved one. Somebody's going to be the Chris in his life or her life. Someone's going to be the H.R. Brown. Someone's going to be the Dave Pinniger. Someone's going to be the Steve Brown. Someone's going to be the Russ who called me out. Someone's going to be the Brian Heaton. Someone's like all of these powerful, influential people in my recovery. My parents could not have collected this group anywhere. And they weren't all in one place. They were, and that's my testimony is that people will be waiting on your path and on your loved one's path, because the eye of the shepherd is upon all of his kids. He's not some distant grandpa, just sitting back, judging us, letting us doing this all on our own and putting this all on you as the family members to figure this out. No, he's very involved. And sometimes we are the problem, like we're getting in the way from his work. And so as we learn how to have faith rather than be led by fear, and we learn how to surrender and walk through that process, and we begin to reclaim who we really are, and we get to have that identity shift, and we get to model what emotional sobriety looks like for our loved ones. And that is a very beautiful ending to this chapter, is to remind you all that you didn't cause it, you can't control it, you can't cure it, but you absolutely can contribute to it or to their recovery by focusing on yours. And as evidenced by many who are listening and who are part of this community, the work doesn't end. The work doesn't end when they pass away. The work doesn't end when they get sober and transcend, because this work is not about the drugs and alcohol. This is about becoming the version of ourselves that we are intended to become. And could it be that this cross that you bear, this adversity that you are experiencing, are actually your refining credentials that prepare you uniquely to be the expert and the confidant and the support, the trusted support to someone who needs you? And could this be a springboard to the next chapter in your life? Likely that's the case. So embracing it, and let this transform who you are and how you think, how you talk, how you act, how you react, by being proactive in your recovery. Onward and upward. I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this show. Thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing these episodes so that they can help others. This is one way that you can give back and pay it forward, is by just passing along this free information to others that are possibly in need. Share it on social media, share it with your loved ones and family members. And don't forget, you can access my book on Audible, as well as on Amazon or on my website, as well as you can find information about our services at Brickhouse Recovery at brickhouserecovery.com.